Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today we're back for our second installment in our series about Derringers. As you may recall from last week, we covered the topic of muzzleloading Derringers, and today we are going to tackle Derringers in the cartridge era. So let's see what that's all about. Now, Henry Derringer himself died in 1868, right at the dawn of the cartridge firing era. But it's as a cartridge gun that Derringers found their greatest expression. Henry certainly never made any himself. But by then, the word Derringer was firmly established as a generic term for that archetype of gun, the short-barreled, directly chambered gun. And that was perfect as a hideout gun in the cartridge era. And they were produced immediately as cartridges became available. Now, I'm going to tell you about the biggest makers of Derringers. But before I get to them, I'm going to give honorable mention to a couple. First is the Sharps 4-barrel pepper box, which is generally classified as a Derringer. It's a 4-barreled gun. Each barrel is loaded directly into the chamber. And it has a firing pin that rotates each time you cock the hammer, so it fires each chamber successively. Sharps made their pepperbox Derringer from 1859 until 1874. And they made many thousands. We don't have good production numbers on them. They were chambered in 32 rimfire and in 22 rimfire. And they're about the earliest Derringers we have. Now, the other pretty early design and a unique design goes to Star, the same guys that made the Star double-action revolver during the Civil War. Their Derringer featured a brass frame, had a side-mounted hammer, and a tip-up barrel. They were made from 1864 until 1869 in Baltimore, Maryland, and they were actually made under contract from Star by the Merrill Patent Arms Manufacturing Company. Now, only 800 of the Stars were made, so there were not a lot of them out there, but they were an innovative design. Now, by far, the most prolific makers of Derringer-type pistols were Colt and Remington. Colt's guns were preceded by the guns made by the Moore Company. Moore produced a cartridge-firing Derringer that used a barrel that twisted sideways to expose a chamber. And they produced them between 1860 and 1865. And they made about 3,000 of those. And another 3,000 were made under contract by the National Firearms Company. And they were in production to some degree until 1870. But Colt acquired the Moore Derringer design. And they used that design to build the Colt No. 1 Derringer and the Colt No. 2 Derringer. And these were exact copies of the Moore. Except the No. 1 was all metal and the No. 2 had wooden grips. That's it. So Colt made the Moore design until 1870. And they made 6,500 of them chambered in 41 rimfire. And 41 rimfire became the ubiquitous Derringer cartridge. In fact, it was listed sometimes as 41 Derringer in its packaging by some companies. Because it was just chambered in so many Derringers and in not all that much else. So some pocket revolvers were chambered in it as well. But it was definitely ubiquitous among Derringers. In 1870, Colt introduced their model No. 3 Derringer. And this was a new design for Colt. It had a side break barrel. And this was going to be a design that would be widely copied by other companies in the firearms industry. Colt manufactured the No. 3 Derringer from 1870 until 1912, and they made over 48,000 of them, chambered in 41 rimfire. So the No. 3 was a typical single-barrel Derringer, had a side break action. You loaded the 41 rimfire cartridge directly into the chamber, closed the barrel, cocked the hammer, pulled the trigger, and did it all again. And it was, as I said, a hugely popular seller for Colt, making 48,000 of them. Now, there are other companies that use side brake actions. Many of them copied from Colt. Some of them unique, but really it's hard to come up with anything unique in this. But there were a number of those companies. I'm going to list them in a couple of slides, just like I did with the copycats of the Percussion Derringer. And you can go through them if you want, and it'll tell you how many were made and where they, how many were produced and what years they were produced in. Now, the Colt No. 3 was a very popular Derringer design, but it was not the most popular design. That has to go to Remington's over and under double-barrel Derringer. Remington made their double-barrel Derringer from 1866 until 1935. They produced over 150,000 of them. And they were all made in 41 rimfire. If you added up all the other Derringers made in the 19th century, they would probably still come up short on the total number of Remington double-barrel Derringers that were made. So this is by far the most popular gun. And it's the one that we all remember because we saw it in so many Western movies and TV shows. It was carried by good guys, bad guys, gamblers. This became what most people associate with the word Derringer today. There are a couple of other types of Derringer actions besides the Colt and Remington types. There were top brake Derringers, and there were three principal ones of those. The C.H. Ballard, they made 3,000. In 1870, they were chambered in 30 caliber rimfire and 22 caliber rimfire. The T.J. Stafford was made in the early 1860s. 2,100 were made. They were chambered in 22 rimfire. And the L.B. Taylor, another top brake design, was made in 1868 through 1870. And it was made in both 22 rimfire and 32 rimfire. And the last major action type, to see enough to really talk about, were swivel barrel Derringers. These were over and under Derringers like the Remington, but where the Remington fired by cocking the hammer, firing it, and the recoil reset the firing pin to the next barrel, so that when you cocked it again, it would shoot the next barrel. These guns had swiveling barrels, so you cocked the hammer and it fired the top barrel. You unlocked it, swiveled the barrel to bring a fresh round in barrel. Under the hammer, cocked it again, fired, and went that way. Frank Wesson's design, chambered in 32 rimfire and 41 rimfire, was probably the most common. And then there was the American Firearms design. For both of these guys, about 5,000 each were produced. So, before we leave the 19th century, I want to take a minute and talk about a couple of other small pistols that, since part one came out last week, I have been asked about many times. I've gotten them in the comments. People have sent me separate emails about them, separate IMs. And that is the Remington Rider pistol and the Chicago Palm pistol, which is actually the Protector Palm pistol. Both of these very small, concealable firearms. And the question that has come up is, are they Derringers? My answer is, no, they are not. And certainly you can disagree with this. I mean, the definition of a Derringer is a little bit fluid. It's kind of like the definition of pornography. It's hard to define, but you know what it is when you see it. So here's why I say that these two guns are not Derringers. The Remington Rider does not load directly into chambers on each barrel. It looks like a double-barrel Derringer. It is not. The bottom, what appears to be a barrel, is actually a tube magazine. And this gun is a magazine-fed weapon. In fact, it's a lot like a lever-action rifle, but instead of the lever being on the bottom, what looks like a hammer up on the top is the lever. And it feeds exactly like a lever-action rifle does with little tiny cartridges. So I would say, no, that's not a Derringer. It does look like one, though, and if you want to make the case, I don't know anybody who's called it one, but in firearms history books, but I could be wrong. Now, in the case of the Protector palm pistol, once again, I would say no, that is not a Derringer. And what it actually is, in my estimation, is a revolver. It's just that the orientation of the cylinder is different than we are used to seeing. So instead of the cartridges lying horizontally, basically you could almost think of them lying vertically. It's like a spiral galaxy almost. So really it's a revolver. When every time you squeeze that, you rotate that disc that brings a new cartridge in to bear in battery with the barrel. You don't load directly into a chamber on the barrel. So in my view of the world, the Protector pocket pistol is not a Derringer. So hopefully that answers a lot of the questions that have come up if I didn't get to everybody who asked it. In the modern era, what we have are primarily copies of the Remington over and under Derringer. Bond Arms is probably the best example these days. They produce a whole line of over and under Remington style Derringers in modern calibers. And there have been a number of Remington clones made over the years. Mine that I've showed you before, this one, was manufactured in West Germany, and it was sold by Herders. Their catalog, which was a fantastic place to oogle guns in my youth. Guns and camping equipment and all the outdoor stuff. You don't see, I'm just going to digress for a minute. Companies like Herders, with their catalogs that we used to have, was like a wish book for us. I don't know that they exist anymore. I mean, now you have Amazon, but it used to be you'd get the Herders catalog, and it would be page after page of outdoor gear, guns and knives, and camping gear and hunting equipment, trapping equipment, reloading equipment. And if you were a gun guy or an outdoor guy, that was better than the Sears catalog as far as being a wish book. And as a kid, I read those things like pornography, and it's a shame that they're not there, because it's a whole different experience than searching online. Right? Because you can flip the pages and see something you'd never even imagined that now you fell in love with. So anyway, this baby here, sold by Herders in .357 Magnum of all things. These days Bonds come in .45 Colt, a whole variety of calibers. So, and there have been others, of course. In the 20th century, there were so many Derringers marketed, it's kind of hard to keep track. There was the High Standard in .22 Magnum, really a great piece. It was around for a long time. X-Cam made some in Europe, very, very popular. Davis Derringers. There were just a lot of them. I honestly... I would not be able to find all of them. So if you've got a favorite brand, Great Western, of course, had them. Just so many and too many to mention. So if you got a favorite, feel free to mention it in the comments if I didn't talk about it. But there were just tons of them available in the 20th century, most of which were copies, of course, of the Remington over and under double Derringer. Mossberg had a gun called the Brownie Pepper Box. Very cool, very much ahead of its time. It was a 4-barrel Derringer, kind of like the Sharps Pepper Box. It was made in .22 rimfire, and they made it from 1919 to 1932, and it very much had semi-auto styling, the grips and that sort of thing. It looked kind of like a semi-auto gun. But they made 37,000 of those. So there were quite a few of them out there, and you can still find them today. Fascinating gun. And we've had other modern attempts at it, like the double tap. If you've ever seen that, quite an interesting gun. I got to handle one of those at SHOT Show years ago. They were not successful in the marketplace, but I wish I'd gotten my hands on one. So that's how the Derringer evolved from a percussion-fired muzzleloader to a gun that's still in use today as you know, an archetype of a gun. Basically, it's still in use today as a concealed carry gun of last resort, I would say. And it's been an interesting journey for that gun. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And I'm going to tell you, I hope you've enjoyed this. And I've had people that have asked me to list my sources. Not that they think I'm lying, some of them probably do, but because they're interested maybe in additional reading and that sort of thing, like to see the sources I've used. So down below the video in the description area here on YouTube, I'm going to list the books I used as research material to put this together. So if you're interested, you can go and read those books, and you can learn a whole lot about Derringers that I didn't feel I had the time to give you here. So until next time, bye.